pen barely made a sound. He smiled, already imagining freedom. Then the judge asked one simple question. Just one. The room went still. Because the answer to that question would decide who was walking out victorious and who wasn't. For 2 years, I, Amara Thorne, lived as a ghost in my own marriage. My husband Liam, a brilliant but ruthless corporate lawyer, saw our vows not as a promise, but as a contract with a loophole he was desperate to exploit. I was the quiet artist, the supportive wife who faded into the background of his high-stakes world. He thought my silence meant surrender. He believed that when he pushed for a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences with that charming, fake sympathetic smile, I would simply accept my diminished fate and walk away with nothing. So today, in this sterile courtroom, I let him believe it. I signed the divorce papers quietly, my head bowed, playing the part of the broken woman he'd crafted. His triumph was a tangible force across the table, but he forgot one thing. Even the quietest person can learn to speak the language of the battlefield, and I hadn't just been painting in my studio all those lonely nights. I'd been studying law. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. The pen barely made a sound, a whisper of black ink on the stark white line. From the corner of my eye, I saw Liam's shoulders drop, a silent exhalation of victory. He thought it was a sigh of relief. I knew it was the release of a 2-year performance finally reaching its climax. The air in the courtroom was cold, recycled, smelling of lemon-scented disinfectant and old paper. A scent that would forever be tied to this moment. My hand, the one holding the pen, trembled with a convincing, delicate weakness. I let it. I had practiced that tremor in the mirror of my empty studio, perfecting the portrait of a broken woman. Across the polished mahogany table, Liam adjusted the cuff of his custom-tailored suit, the subtle glint of his platinum watch catching the fluorescent light. He didn't look at me. His gaze was already on the horizon. On the freedom he'd so meticulously plotted to obtain without cost. I could almost smell the coconut-scented sunscreen of the Caribbean getaway he'd booked for next week, a fact I knew courtesy of a forwarded confirmation email he'd carelessly left open on our shared home computer, an account I still monitored from the shadows. His lawyer, Mr. Drayton, gave a short, satisfied nod, stacking the signed documents with the efficiency of a mortician sealing a coffin. My coffin, in their view. I kept my head bowed, my dark hair a curtain shielding my face. The single perfect tear I'd allowed to well up and trace a path down my cheek was now cold against my skin. It was the final touch in the masterpiece of defeat I'd painted for them. For 2 years, I had been the ghost in the marble and glass tomb of our marriage. Amara Thorne, the quiet artist wife, the supportive, smiling accessory at law firm galas, the one who could be counted on to arrange the flowers and fade into the background, while the important people like Liam, discussed mergers and acquisitions and loopholes. He saw our vows as a binding contract, yes, but one with a termination clause he was determined to trigger in his favor, leaving all assets, emotional and financial, in his possession. The flashbacks came, unbidden but useful, hardening the soft core of me that still, stupidly, ached. They were not waves of emotion, but sharp, clinical slides under a microscope. Him, standing in the doorway of my sunlit studio, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, looking at the large canvas where I was attempting to capture the chaos and beauty of a stormy sea. "It's passionate, Amara," he'd said. His tone implying passionate was synonymous with unmarketable. "But have you considered something more serene? Landscapes sell. This just feels turbulent." He'd taken a sip, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Maybe something to match the sofa." Later, the slow, systematic isolation. "Your friend Chloe. She's so dramatic, darling. All that artist angst. It's draining, don't you think?" And my circle of friends, my lifeline from the life before him, had gradually blurred and faded, painted over by his dismissive charm and the exhausting work of defending them. Then, the gaslighting, the missing receipts for my art supplies, him insisting I'd spent triple what I recalled. Your memory's always been a bit floaty, my love, focused on your dreams, not the details. The details, of course, were the spreadsheets of his wealth, which grew while my sense of reality shrunk. And the perfumes, not his. Faint, clinging to his wool coat when he returned from late client dinners, scents of jasmine and night-blooming flowers, foreign and unmistakable. When I'd once, voice small, asked about it, he'd laughed, pulling me close in a hug that felt like a straitjacket. You're imagining things, probably the cleaner the office uses. You've been in that studio with the turpentine too long. He'd offered the divorce with the demeanor of a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis, regretful, inevitable, and above all, professional. Irreconcilable differences, the papers stated. The term was so bland, so legally sanitized, it erased the screaming fights he'd started over nothing, the cold silences that could last days, the way he'd look through me as if I were made of glass. His offer was a clean break, a phrase that meant I'd walk away with a pittance, a lump sum that wouldn't cover a year of the lifestyle he'd accustomed me to, and full ownership of my studio, which he'd always considered a charmingly worthless hobby shack. In return, I waived all future claims to alimony, to his skyrocketing earnings, and to his stake in Thorn and Crest Legal. He was buying his freedom for pennies on the dollar, and he was so sure I was too emotionally frail and financially ignorant to understand the math. Your Honor, we believe the settlement is fair and equitable, given the circumstances and the brief duration of the marriage without children. Mr. Drayton's voice was a smooth baritone, designed to soothe and convince. He addressed Judge Wilkins, a woman in her 60s with a stern, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing behind her sleek glasses. She had been listening with an air of detached scrutiny, her gaze flicking between Liam's confident, open posture and my own crumpled one. Liam finally glanced at me, his expression a masterpiece of performative pity. It was the look one gives a wounded animal before stepping around it. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug to his lawyer as if to say, "See? Easy. I told you she'd fold." Judge Wilkins reviewed the final document, her pen poised over her own signature to make the decree official. The room held its breath. Liam's financial disclosures, bound in a sleek leather folio, sat before her. To anyone else, they were impenetrable forests of numbers and legalese. To me, and I knew to her, they were a story, and every good story has a plot hole. She looked up, not at the lawyers, but directly at Liam. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, clear, and it cut through the quiet like a scalpel. Mr. Thorn, your financial disclosures appear thorough. A standard opening. Liam's smile tightened, ready for the final rubber stamp. However, she continued, and the word hung in the air, heavy with possibility, I have one question regarding Exhibit D, the valuation of your equity stake in Thorn and Crest Legal. Liam blinked. Mr. Drayton's head tilted a fraction of an inch. The valuation date used here for the marital estate assessment, Judge Wilkins said, tapping the document with her finger, is from 18 months ago. Can you explain why? Given the firm's recent merger with Hartwell Group and the 300% valuation increase that was publicly reported in the Financial Times 3 months ago, this particular earlier date was selected. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the quiet of procedure. It was the vacuum-sealed silence of a room where the oxygen has just been sucked out. The clock on the wall ticked, each second a hammer blow. Liam's smile didn't just fade, it dissolved, leaving behind a blank mask of confusion that quickly twitched into panic. He turned sharply to Mr. Drayton, who was already leaning forward, flipping frantically through his own copy of the exhibits. Your Honor, Mr. Drayton began, his smooth voice now slightly abrasive. That date is a standard cutoff for valuation in many marital dissolutions. The merger was still in its preliminary phases at that time, its full financial impact highly speculative. The reported increase is forward-looking. The tangible marital asset is best represented by the historical concrete value. It was a good answer. A practiced one. But it was a wall of sand facing a rising tide. Judge Wilkins's expression did not change. She simply waited, letting Drayton's words settle into the tense air, her unwavering gaze now fixed on Liam. I am familiar with standard cutoffs, counsel. I am also familiar with the duty of full, frank, and transparent disclosure. A merger of this magnitude, finalized and publicly celebrated with significant reported financial growth prior to the filing of this dissolution, would seem to be a material fact. Mr. Thorne, did you believe the value of your primary asset had tripled at the time you asked your wife to sign this agreement, waiving any claim to it? Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The confident lawyer, the master negotiator, was tongue-tied. A faint sheen of sweat appeared at his temples. He looked from the judge to me, and for the first time in years, his eyes truly met mine. He wasn't seeing a ghost or a defeated wife. He was looking for something. A clue, a flicker of shared confusion, of innocence. I did not give it to him. I held his gaze for a brief, electric second, my tear-streaked face placid. Then I slowly, deliberately, straightened my posture. The tremor in my hands stilled. I reached into the plain leather tote bag at my feet, my movements now deliberate, calm, and utterly without fear. The performance was over. The real Amara Thorne, the one who had spent countless lonely nights not just drowning in sorrow, but studying corporate law, forensic accounting textbooks, and the specifics of merger valuations, was finally taking the stand. The room's energy, which had been flowing inexorably toward Liam's victory, reversed direction with a violent tug. Everyone felt it. The bailiff by the door, the court reporter whose fingers hovered over her machine, the shark-like stillness of Judge Wilkins. Liam's triumphant exit had just hit a legal dead end, and in the driver's seat, her hand now closing around a small, sleek flash drive in her bag, was the quiet wife he'd written off. The first move had been his. The next, and everyone after, would be mine. The vacuum of silence stretched, thin and fragile. Liam's panic was a live wire in the air, crackling between him and his lawyer. Mr. Drayton placed a steadying hand on the table, a subtle gesture meant to anchor his client. Your Honor, if I may clarify, he began, his voice meticulously recalibrated to project calm reason. The post-merger valuation is highly contingent on future performance metrics and earn-out clauses. It is, by definition, speculative. The pre-merger valuation is a concrete, audited figure. We selected the date that best represented a tangible, non-speculative marital asset to avoid future litigation over hypotheticals. It was a conservative approach. Judge Wilkins leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, steepling her fingers. A conservative approach that values a law firm on the cusp of a transformational merger at its pre-transformation price. Interesting. Her tone was dry enough to start a fire. Ms. Thorne, were you aware of this merger? And of the reported 300% valuation increase? All eyes swung to me. This was the moment. The quiet, broken woman was being asked to speak. I kept my hands folded on the table, the ghost of the tremor still in my fingers, but my voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was clear, low, and carried to every corner of the still room. Yes, Your Honor, I was aware. I paused, letting the admission hang. Liam's eyes narrowed, suspicion now dawning, ugly and bright. My husband discussed it frequently at home. He was particularly excited about the Hartwell windfall, as he called it. He said it would set us, up for life. Objection, hearsay, Drayton snapped, but it was reflexive, a lawyer's twitch. I'm not entering it as evidence of the merger's value, counsel, but as evidence of her knowledge and his state of mind, Judge Wilkins said without looking at him. her eyes fixed on me. "Continue, Ms. Thorne." I reached into my tote bag and withdrew the sleek black flash drive. It looked innocuous, a sliver of plastic and metal, but in that context, it was a weapon. "I am also aware because I have documentation. On this drive, you will find the full merger prospectus, which was delivered to our home. You will find email chains from my husband's personal account, which he left logged in on our shared home computer, discussing the valuation metrics and profit projections with his partners at Thorne & Crest. These emails date from both before and after the valuation date used in these disclosures." Liam made a choked sound. She had no right. Those are private, privileged." The computer was marital property in the marital home, with no password protection on the email client, as the forensic computer analyst's report, also on the drive, will confirm, I said, my tone as neutral as a newsreader. The flashback was instant. Me, sitting in the dark glow of the monitor, my heart hammering not with guilt, but with a furious, focused intensity as I copied files methodically, night after night, while he slept soundly downstairs, dreaming of his escape. I handed the drive to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. She plugged it into her laptop. The click of the connection was deafening. For a minute, the only sound was the soft tap of her fingers on the keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. The color drained from Liam's face, leaving a waxy pallor. Mr. Drayton had stopped looking at me and was now staring at his client, a silent, furious question in his eyes. "I see," Judge Wilkins said finally. Her gaze lifted and it was arctic. "Mr. Drayton, you will want to review this with your client. In particular, an email from a Gregory Crest dated 4 months ago, which states, and I quote, 'With the Hartwell numbers finalized, our per-partner share is set to increase by 312% year over year. The future is literally now. Time to ditch the dead weight.'" She let the poisonous phrase "dead weight" linger in the air. My face remained impassive, though the words were a scalpel to an old familiar wound. "This email was sent well after your selected valuation date. It suggests the windfall was neither speculative nor future-looking at the time of filing. It was, in your partner's words, now." "Your Honor, this is—" Liam started, his voice strangled. "I'm not finished," she cut him off. "Ms. Thorne, you mentioned bank statements." "Yes, Your Honor." I produced a printed bound report from my bag. "These are statements from a bank in Delaware under the business name TC Holdings LLC, an entity formed by my husband 6 months ago. They show 7-figure deposits that correspond precisely with the post-merger profit distribution schedules outlined in the emails. None of these accounts, nor the income flowing into them, were disclosed in the financial affidavits. The funds from our joint accounts were used to seed this LLC 3 months before he filed for divorce. The unraveling was no longer subtle. It was a cascade. The judge accepted the report. Liam looked like a man watching his own life raft drift away, motor dead. Mr. Drayton had closed his eyes for a brief second, a lawyer seeing his entire case and his reputation flash before his eyes. "Your Honor," Drayton tried, his voice stripped of all its polished confidence, now just raw damage control. "My client There may have been a misunderstanding about the delineation between pre- and post-merger assets. A restructuring of business entities during a complex merger is not uncommon. We can provide clarification. Amend the disclosures." "Misunderstanding?" Judge Wilkins's voice was like shattering ice. "Counselor, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a deliberate, systematic pattern of concealment. You have presented a valuation you knew, or should have known, was materially false. You have omitted substantial liquid assets. This goes beyond bad faith. It skirts the edge of fraud upon this court." She turned her gaze fully on Liam. "Mr. Thorne, you are an officer of the court. You understand the sanctity of full disclosure. Explain to me why I should not sanction you for litigation misconduct, hold you in contempt, and refer this matter to the State Bar and the District Attorney's Office for investigation into perjury on your sworn financial affidavit." The word perjury hit the room like a thunderclap. This was no longer about money. This was about his license, his freedom, his entire identity. The arrogant architect of his own freedom was now staring at the blueprints of a prison. Liam shattered. The carefully constructed facade of the poised, successful lawyer crumbled into dust. He surged to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is her! This is her vengeance!" he shouted, his finger jabbing wildly in my direction. All eyes were on him, a spectacle of glorious, unraveling rage. "She's twisted it all! She's a jealous, bitter woman who can't accept that I've outgrown her. She's been snooping, hacking, manipulating." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge commanded, her voice low and dangerous. But he was beyond hearing. He turned to me, his face a mask of pure, unvarnished hatred. "You did this! You pathetic little artist! You planned this! All those nights pretending to be asleep, pretending to be hurt. You were just studying?" I finally looked at him, truly looked at him, and let him see everything I had buried for years. The pain, yes, but behind it, the cold, hard core of resolve. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was my confirmation, and it was more devastating than any scream. His lawyer physically pulled him back into his seat, hissing in his ear. Liam collapsed, not in defeat, but in a kind of furious, impotent collapse, like a puppet with its strings cut by a vengeful god. Judge Wilkins let the chaos settle, her composure a stark contrast to the wreckage before her. "The settlement agreement presented to this court," she said, each word measured and heavy, "is founded on a material misrepresentation of assets and a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty. It is therefore voidable. I am rejecting it in its entirety." Liam let out a low groan. "Furthermore," she continued, "I am granting Ms. Thorne's oral motion for full forensic accounting of all marital assets, personal and business, from the date of the marriage to the present. All costs for this accounting will be borne by Mr. Thorne. I am also imposing sanctions for litigation misconduct payable to Ms. Thorne to cover her legal fees incurred to date. A hearing is set in 60 days. At that time, I will also rule on the motion for referral to disciplinary and criminal authorities. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. The sound was final. In the hollow silence that followed the judge's exit, the room felt charged and broken. Mr. Drayton was already packing his things with violent, jerky motions, not looking at his client. Liam sat frozen, staring at the grain of the wooden table as if it held the answers to how it had all gone so wrong. I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady. The quiet wife was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but tempered. I collected my simple tote bag, the one that had held the keys to his downfall. As I turned to leave, Liam's voice, hollow and broken, stopped me. "Amara." I paused, but didn't face him. "Why?" The word was stripped bare of all its former arrogance. It was just a raw, bewildered wound. I finally turned my head, meeting his shattered gaze. I gave him the truth, the only part of it he was capable of understanding now. "You broke the contract first, Liam. You turned a home into a negotiation. I just learned to speak your language." I let a ghost of the old, sad smile touch my lips, the final performance. The quiet signature wasn't my surrender. It was my closing argument. I walked out of the courtroom, the heavy door sighing shut behind me, cutting off the world of his ruin. The hallway outside was bright, silent, and empty. For the first time in years, the air I breathed felt like my own. The sigh of the heavy courtroom door closing behind me didn't feel like an end, but a beginning. A first, clean breath after years of suffocating. The sterile lemon-scented air of the hallway was suddenly invigorating. I didn't run. I didn't sag against the wall in relief. I walked, my heels clicking a steady, measured rhythm on the polished marble floor, a sound that echoed my own heartbeat, calm, alive, and finally free. The muffled, furious roar from behind the door, Liam's voice, a distorted animal sound of rage, was nothing more than a distant storm, sealed away. My lawyer, Eleanor Vance, was waiting by the elevator bank, a compact, fierce woman in a severe black suit. She hadn't been in the courtroom. We'd agreed her presence would have tipped Liam off that I was anything other than utterly alone. She'd been my shadow general, the strategist who turned my late-night research and secreted evidence into legal artillery. Her lips were pressed into a thin, satisfied line. "The forensic accountant, Luca, is already on standby," she said, dispensing with any greeting. "He'll have the court order by this afternoon. We hit the bank records and the LLC filings before Drayton can even advise his client to breathe. The sanctions award should cover my fees and Luca's retainer, but we'll need to move for immediate temporary support from the frozen marital accounts. I'll draft the motion by tonight." I nodded, the reality of the next step settling not as a burden, but as a purpose. "Thank you, Eleanor, for believing me when I first walked into your office with nothing but a file of suspicions and a flash drive." She gave a rare, sharp smile. "I believe in evidence. And you, Amara, are a surprisingly quick study." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. "He'll try to contact you. Don't answer. Everything goes through me now. This," she said, stepping inside, "is war. And we just won the first decisive battle." She was right. The phone in my bag began to vibrate before I'd even reached the courthouse steps. Liam's name flashed on the screen, a ghost from a life already gone. I watched it pulse until it went to voicemail. A minute later, a text lit up. "Amara, we need to talk. This is insanity. You can't do this. Delete." Another, "It was a mistake, a bad valuation. We can fix this. Delete." A third, darker in tone. "You'll regret this. You have no idea what you're starting." I saved that one, forwarded it to Eleanor, and blocked the number. The threats were just noise. The law was on my side now, a shield I had helped forge. The temporary support hearing 2 weeks later was a formality. With Judge Wilkins's scathing findings of concealment and misconduct hanging over him, Liam's side had no leverage. I was granted a generous monthly allowance from our joint assets, more than enough to live on and to maintain the studio. Liam was ordered to pay all household bills pending final resolution. He sat slumped at his table, a shell of the man who had smiled at my quiet signature. He didn't look at me once. The victory was quiet, procedural, and absolute. The 60 days until the final disposition hearing passed not in a blur of anxiety, but in a focused flurry of activity. Luca, the forensic accountant, was a wizard. His reports were devastating works of art, flowcharts and timelines that laid bare the entire architecture of Liam's deceit. The Delaware LLC was just the tip of the iceberg. There were hidden investment accounts, stock transfers to a cousin's name, even an overpayment to a vendor who kicked back funds to a separate P.O. box Liam controlled. The scale of it was breathtaking, not in its genius, but in its greedy, panicked clumsiness. He hadn't just hidden the merger windfall. He'd been salting away assets for over a year, a squirrel hoarding nuts for a winter he planned to spend alone in the sun. Eleanor used the reports like a master tactician. Our settlement demands were aggressive, 60% of the true marital estate, including a share of his future partnership draws from Thorn and Crest for the next 10 years, the fully paid-off penthouse apartment, which I no longer wanted, and full ownership of my studio plus a lump sum to expand it. It was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning. The night before the final hearing, Liam tried one last desperate gambit. A courier delivered a letter to my studio, not from his lawyer, but from him, on his personal stationery. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a blend of faux remorse, wounded pride, and veiled threat. "Amara," it began, "this has gone too far. You're tearing down everything I built, everything we had. Yes, I made mistakes. I was scared. I was confused. But what you're doing, it's annihilation. They're talking about disbarment, criminal charges. Is that what you want? To see me in prison after everything we shared? I'm offering you a deal. Take the penthouse. Take $1 million in cash. Right now. Clean. Walk away and I'll make the rest go away. We can both move on. But if you go into that courtroom tomorrow, there will be consequences. For both of us. Don't throw your future away on vengeance. Remember the good times. Liam." I read it under the bright, unforgiving lights of my studio, the smell of turpentine and fresh gesso in the air. I felt nothing but a cold, clean contempt. He still didn't understand. He thought this was a bigger negotiation. He thought my future was something he could still grant or withhold. He couldn't see that my future was the large, blank canvas on the easel beside me, waiting for my hand alone. I took the letter, walked to my small sink, and lit a corner with a match. I held it as it burned, dropping the ashes into the stainless steel basin and washing them down the drain. Vengeance was a hollow, exhausting motive. This was justice, and justice, I had learned, had a clarity that vengeance could never touch. The final hearing was an anticlimax. Liam, advised by a new grim-faced attorney who specialized in damage control, agreed to every one of our terms. There was no fight left. The specter of Judge Wilkins's referral to the district attorney's office was a guillotine over his neck. He signed the new voluminous settlement agreement with a hand that shook. I signed with the same steady hand I had used before, but this time, the signature was a declaration, not a performance. Judge Wilkins approved it without comment. Only a final warning look at Liam that promised her watchful eye was not done with him. As I walked out of the courthouse for the last time, Eleanor handed me a final document. "The wire transfer for the initial lump sum will hit by 5 p.m. The title for the studio is already in your name. The rest is structured per the agreement. It's over, Amara. You're free." The word free finally landed, not with a shout, but with a profound, settling peace. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I never would. I went straight to my studio. Weeks later, the studio was unrecognizable. It was no longer a modest rented space in a dusty building. It was a bright, airy loft in a converted warehouse, north-facing windows flooding the space with perfect, clear light. The settlement had allowed me to buy it outright. Canvases in various states of creation leaned against white walls. The air hummed with potential, not silence. I was working on the largest one, a 6-foot by 4-foot canvas. It wasn't a stormy sea or a serene landscape to match a sofa. It was an abstract, but one with fierce, definite intention. Swathes of cool, oppressive gray, the color of Liam's suits, of courtroom walls, were being overtaken, torn through by bold, violent strokes of crimson and gold. Buried within the layers of paint, almost archaeological, were faint textural imprints, photocopies of lines from our divorce papers, from the damning emails, their words blurred and obscured by the medium, swallowed by the color rising above them. It was a phoenix, but not from mythic flame. It was a phoenix from the cold ash of legal documents and broken vows. My phone buzzed on the work table. A news alert. I wiped my hands on a rag and glanced at it. Prominent attorney disbarred, faces charges. The State Bar Association today announced the immediate disbarment of Liam Thorne, former partner at Thorne & Crest Legal, following a finding of egregious fraud and ethical misconduct related to concealment of assets in his divorce proceedings. The district attorney's office has confirmed he is under indictment on multiple counts of perjury and fraud. Thorne & Crest, reeling from the scandal, issued a statement confirming his removal from the firm. I didn't read the rest. I felt no thrill, no schadenfreude. I felt a distant, quiet acknowledgement, like hearing the final, closing note of a symphony that had long since stopped playing for me. His victory had been his ultimate, self-constructed defeat. My victory was here, in the smell of the paint, in the light on the floor, in the unwavering certainty of my own hand. I put the phone down, screened to the table. I picked up a wide, flat brush and loaded it with a color I'd been saving, a deep, vibrant, unforgettable ultramarine blue, the color of a clear sky after a long storm, of depth, of a new beginning. I approached the canvas, my movements sure and calm. I found the spot that needed it, the heart of the emerging form where the gray was finally, completely shattered. I laid the color on with one confident sweeping stroke. It was the defining stroke, the final one this painting needed. I stepped back, the brush loose in my hand, and looked at what I had created. It was powerful. It was mine. The pen in that courtroom had barely made a sound, a whisper of surrender he'd been so eager to hear. But the truth, once spoken, had echoed. It echoed through the hallowed silence of the judge's chamber, through the frantic corridors of banks and LLCs, through the sterile pages of forensic reports, and it had finally, blessedly, echoed him right out of my life. And here, in the quiet of my own light-filled world, the only sound left was the beautiful, boundless silence of a canvas waiting for the next stroke, and a future waiting to be painted, on my terms, alone.